Hi, this is Winslow Sargeant. I am the Senior Vice President for Partnerships with the International Council of Small Business. I'm also the Vice President of Data Policy and Advocacy. I am formerly the Chief Counsel for Advocacy at the Small Business Administration, so I just wanted to share that background in terms of my history with small business. Today, I'm pleased to present a presentation on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, MSMEs, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. I will share more as we go along. When the next slide, the purpose of this presentation, I want to share in terms of when we think of small businesses, when we think of MSMEs, we want to relate as to what is the purpose? Why do they play such an important role in our economy, and society? And so I've chosen a slide number 2 from Heal Our World, which shows the intersection of commerce, social impact, and data. And data is especially important because we are characterized, this age that we're in is called the 4th Industrial Revolution. You know, there have been 3 previous revolutions, and now we're focused in more of data. How do we use data, and how will that impact lives? And to tie this in, I want to share with you how this ties into what's called the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals that have been outlined by the United Nations, and the goal, and each one of these goals we're supposed to reach by 2030. And so the International Council of Small Business has made the case that for these goals to be reached, you have to include people, but more than that, you have to tie into the grassroots and tie into business. And in the business setting, that means you have to work with micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. They hold the key to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And so when we look at the densities of MSMEs around the world, you can see the red highlights, the number of MSMEs per capita. And so, within the United States, within Brazil, there are a number of MSMEs, in terms of red. In Europe and in Asia, of course, there are more MSMEs. And so what we're saying is that MSMEs, when you look at the contribution to the various economies, they're where people are. In the highly industrialized economies, you see that almost half the population will work for large companies. But as you look at the numbers around the globe, you see a higher percentage of the population working for MSMEs, and it's as much as 90% of the population, which is a huge number when it comes to the impact that they make. What this figure does not highlight is that that with MSMEs and in many countries, there's not a lot of data that's available. You see that there are some parts of Africa and some parts of Asia, there's no data available. But that does not mean that the contribution of MSMEs are less. In fact, in many of these societies, because they may not have a lot of large companies, you see the contributions of MSMEs far greater. Now, in many of these countries, though, they have these companies may be part of what's called the informal sector. There's the formal sector, those who are registered by the government, and and who get loans and who can grow. And then there's the informal sector, those who are not registered. And in some places, if you look at the data, almost fire emergency reported in the building. Please leave the building by the nearest exit or exit stairway. Do not use the elevator. Put there, if you're listening in, please. Can someone please put their microphone? Please put.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please?
There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please leave the building by the nearest exit or exit stairway. Do not use the elevator.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please?
There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please leave the building by the nearest exit or exit stairway. Do not use the elevator.
Okay. I think we're okay now. I hope not. It's hurt. Seems to be an emergency. So when we look at the MSMEs by region and by income, you can see that according to Figure 3, you can see, and it's an eye chart. It's hard to see, but the goal of this chart is to show you that with economies with higher income per capita, they tend to have more MSMEs per 1,000 people. Right. So if you look at the chart, and if you would zero in on some of the names of the countries, you can see that as you go along per capita, you're seeing more MSMEs. Figure 4 shows is a similar chart that shows by density and by region the contributions of MSMEs. What is interesting that this chart shows that on one hand, there are not a lot of MSMEs in terms of density in sub-Saharan Africa, but yet in Latin America, the densities of MSMEs are actually higher than the higher income non-OECD economies. And so we're seeing, so it's not a straight line in terms of if you're an emerging economy or a region, you have MSMEs. No, there is some variation, and I wanted to point that out in Figure 4, that Latin America and the Caribbean, they have a higher density of MSMEs than non-OECD countries. So how do we unlock the potential of MSMEs as it relates to the SDG goals? And so I wanted to ask this question because the Sustainable Development Goals are what we're shooting for, right? We know the 17 goals that are set. These are follow-on to the Millennium Development Goals that were set back in 2000. So what can be done, or how can we highlight the impact that MSMEs have in sustaining or in achieving the SDG goals? And so this chart just shows here, again, in terms of the productivity of MSMEs. I think that the narrative that MSMEs are not productive or are not innovative is not a good narrative. I mean, as a matter of fact, there are various studies that have shown that when you look at the efficiency, the productivity, when you look at the innovation that takes place, you're seeing more coming from MSMEs. Now, this chart shows just the contribution in terms of the people that work for MSMEs. In particular, 85% of employees that work for MSMEs between 50 and 249 employees. Now, while 55% work for micro, that's 1 to 9 employees. Now, one aspect that MSMEs struggle with. And the number one challenge that MSMEs have, and I don't remember a time where access to capital was not a problem, but it continues to be a problem, and it's a total credit gap. And as I mentioned previously, in many economies, they struggle with the formal versus informal enterprise, and there's a huge gap. And so when you're formal, that means that you're able to access banks and lending institutions. When you're informal, that means that you don't really exist or that you're not registered. Then you have to access family and friends, but that capital is far more limited and more expensive than for those who are in the formal sector. But also means that the informal enterprises will struggle to scale or grow because they don't have access to capital. So let's look at this chart. And so for Latin America and the Caribbean, we can see that there is a credit gap. You know, this chart shows around the world that in various regions, whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in the Pacific or South Asia, or Sub-Saharan Africa, there's some countries that do better than others. Just to point out that in the Congo, you can see right in Sub-Saharan Africa, there is a huge credit gap. While in North and South America, you could see the country of Colombia, they're struggling with access to capital. And so how do we do this? How do we do this means how do we close the gap? We have to look at ways in terms of policy to address the informal sector, because I believe that once we can address the informal sector, then we bring those businesses out of the shadows, and then we can close this gap in terms of formal versus informal. And so what I just showed you was the informal sector. Now the gap with the formal sector, so we've moved from $2 trillion US dollars to a gap of about 1 trillion. So we've actually cut that, according to the World Bank, we've cut that credit gap in half, and that's a huge amount in terms of access credit that would be made available for those businesses who would now be in the formal sector. Once again, this deals with government policy. How do you create an environment, a regulatory environment, so that you're not penalizing you're not burdening those companies that choose to stay in the informal sector, and to bring them into the formal sector. Next, I want to transition to how do we tie this all into the Sustainable Development Goals, right? As was pointed out, there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and so each one will pinpoint a area of concern, both in society and what we need to do to achieve that gap. And so so goal number 3, that if you're keeping a score or just looking down the chart in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 3 deals with good health and well-being, right? So the goal number 3 is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages, at all ages. And so how does that tie into small businesses, micro small businesses? Well, there's a company in Azerbaijan. The co-founder is Layla. She created an app that makes accessing medicine much easier. She is the founder of HealthBox, and what this company does, it transfers a patient's data and a patient's health and vital data directly to physicians and pharmacists. The challenge that they have in Azerbaijan is that in the large cities, there's an oversupply of medical providers, which is true for a lot of places. But in rural regions, they suffer from shortages of pharmacies and qualified medical professionals. So what her app does is that now with technology, using technology, she's able to, for her region, she's come up with a model to provide patients' health and vital data statistics directly to physicians and pharmacists, so that now you're able to provide better health care. And once again, this is and to do good by doing well. Next, one of the Sustainable Development Goals, number 4, deals with quality education. Goal number 4 is to ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. Now, we know that the more educated you are, the better outcome you tend to have, right? Because it's a domino effect. You can take better care of your health. You can provide for your family. You're able to have employment, and so how do we work to achieve this goal? So in this case, Sana is an entrepreneur from Syria. And so she is an electrical engineer. She's a computer engineer, which I have a soft spot in my heart since I am trained as an electrical engineer. But she is the CEO of Darity, which is a Syrian startup that creates interactive kits to teach children the principles of electronics. And so this is very, very encouraging, because we're in the information age. As I outlined, we're in the 4th industrial revolution, which means we're dealing with data. There's so many are using smartphones and have tapped into technology. But as part of her company, it's part of her mission is that they want to bridge that gap, is to teach children the principles of electronics so they can build their own devices. So they're not just users of technology, they will be developers of technology. What is also very, very encouraging, as I have outlined and have shown the previous 2 slides, is that you're seeing that for the Sustainable Development Goals, that these are from countries who we don't normally think of technology savvy, right? When you think of Azerbaijan, when you think of Syria, you don't think of, okay, this is where technology is coming from. But what's great about the age we live in is that we cannot discount any section or any place or any person, gender, or ethnicity in the world. We know that knowledge is not localized. So it's very encouraging to see someone like Sana share her talents and be on the ground in terms of teaching children in her community, but also showing a platform, showing a pathway to say that you don't have to be in the high income economies or in the wealthy economies or in the north, that you can be anywhere and come up with something that that will treat that will solve problems. Next, goal number 6 is to ensure access to water and sanitation for all. Once again, this also ties into health, and it's I think that as we grow, as the world population continues to grow, we still need to have access to water. Water is life. Having clean water also allows you to live a healthy life. And so, in this case, we tap into Samina. Samina is the CEO of Ast Purifier. She's from Bangladesh. And so she's come up with a water filter that is designed to tackle arsenic contamination of drinking water using readily available rice husk ash. So in this case, she's using materials from her community. Rice is readily available, and so when you and so there's a husk that is associated with the production, with the harvesting of rice. And so she's been able to use that as a resource to come up with the technology that that treated rust ash has properties that can absorb heavy metal particles such as arsenic away from water. Now we know that arsenic is a commonly occurring element, but in high quantities it can lead to poison, and it can lead to all sorts of health problems. And so this the the impact of her technology is huge, right? When you think about it, this has the potential to impact more than 20 million lives every year. And once again, this is a technology that's coming from Bangladesh, and so we can embrace the impact of MSMEs and entrepreneurs in various communities as they relate to sustainable development goals. And in each one of these, we haven't talked about access to capital. Although each one of them use capital, they receive some funding from AAAS, but and to get them off the ground. And so we see a solution, but now to scale this technology, to hire more people, to make it more readily available, then of course that's when we deal with marketing and access to capital. So what are some of the benefits of the Sustainable Development Goals? What we're seeing is a shift in the entrepreneurial landscape brought about by grassroots innovation, some with little formal education and technical know-how. We're seeing technology, and for some people, they call this reverse innovation. So innovation is not just happening in the North or the high-income countries. We're seeing the impact of innovation everywhere. And as a matter of fact, we're seeing a shift where technologies may be developed in emerging countries that may find their way to the highly developed countries or the highly industrialized countries. And that's a positive that is going both ways. We also see that innovation in entrepreneurship is a recipe for inclusive development. We cannot discount half of the population in terms of gender, in terms of women, or in terms of various ethnic groups, whether you're on one scale or whether you're on the east side of town or the left or the south of the town, or if you're in various classes. We know that knowledge is not localized, and by recognizing this, we give the opportunity for those who can contribute, give them the opportunity to can. We also know that when you think of SDGs and think of the solution for SDGs, that this has a tremendous opportunity for the eradication of poverty through profits. For something to truly be sustainable, we're focused with MSMEs, we're focused on the for-profit sector, because if you can generate profits, that means that you can sustain, that you can create unemployment, you can create employment, you can help communities and help societies. We also see that solutions develop in both developed and developing world. This is what I said previously in terms of the whole concept of reverse innovation. But there are challenges for MSMEs. I painted a story in terms of what are some of the potentials and where they should be, but we should also highlight what are some of the challenges, what are some of the impediments that we must address for wider adoption, for those who have the talents, those who have the drive to start a company and to scale a company. What are some of their challenges? And so we know that when you think of MSMEs, those who they call churn. Churn is especially a problem for the service sector. So you'll see a restaurant that will start one year and it'll close the next, then another, and then a new one will come up. So we have to address what are some of the challenges of churn, what can be done to reduce churn. Churn has its place, by the way. Those companies that are not sustainable, well, I don't think we should sustain them. They need to either adapt or they need to do something else. But churn is something that we have to look at. We also have to look at the affordability of capital. You know, the formal versus informal, but also those who are in the formal race, they don't get access to the same capital and they don't pay the same interest rates that the large companies pay. And so how do we create a carve out what's called a discount, so the the various banks or the government of the central banks of these countries will create an instrument where we're providing a cheaper access to capital, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, so that they can scale, so that they can grow. Because when we think of MSMEs, they are some of those MSMEs will be the large companies of the future. So it's okay to be a large company. I mean, we benefit by, by having large companies, but also we want to make sure that we support MSMEs, and access to capital is very, very important. And that goes into the lack of growth, the informal versus formal, and the lower skill markets. For us to really tap in and to make sure that we empower the MSMEs, we must provide a pathway for growth that may deal with education. That's where the various nonprofits or some of the educational institutions can provide the knowledge that might be needed, so that those who want to grow a business and scale a business, that they'll know how. Governments can also work in terms of contracting. There are a lot of contracts that government may provide, and so they shouldn't all go to large companies. They can go to small companies, and so there have been a carve out. And then we need to organize the advocacy before courts and governmental bodies. In many societies, MSMEs don't have a dedicated organization where they solely focus on providing advocacy for them. I mean, MSMEs, as an Argentina minister said recently, that SMEs, when someone is talking, they're talked about by everyone, but they belong to no one. No one wants to, very few people want to be the champion. And and so we have to encourage, bodies, and we have to empower those bodies that want to go before the courts and go before the governmental bodies to be a champion for MSMEs. And so when we see the connectivity, going back to the SDG goals, you see the digital future, how technology is reshaping how MSMEs are being formed, solving problems, scaling. We know that entrepreneurship is rising. We're starting to empower people. We know that once you, now with technology, create a company and you have a web presence, you're truly a global company. Because as long as you have access to the web, to the internet, and you create a company, then someone from across the border, from across the world, once they get your URL, they can log on to your web page. So then right away you become a global company. So you're in the global marketplace. The urban world continues to grow. So we still need to focus on the local aspect in terms of making sure that the problems that are solved are local. In terms of the resources within the planet, we had to think about climate change in terms of what does a growing world mean? What does a world that we are all connected? What does that mean for us? And that ties into health. Health is something that needs to be addressed. And although we have more technology, although we have more science, we have to address the impact of the workforce. We have to impact the impact of a clean environment, and health is something that can be addressed, and it must be addressed for us to reach our goals. And so the next transition I want to make here is that, okay, so I've outlined why MSMEs are important, and as it relates to sustainable development goals and the crucial role that they're going to play. But now we need to also address the challenge of automation and artificial intelligence. There are studies that show that we're going to need 600 million jobs in the next 15 years just to sustain the workforce. But now we're butting up against technology, because when you look at automation, when you look at AI, I think I read a study where that for every robot that goes that is used in the workplace, 5 jobs will be eliminated. So just think, every one robot, 1 to 5, and so we have a growing population, but we're having a reduced number of jobs. And I don't believe that universal basic income is sustainable. You just can't pay someone a sustainable grant every month and not have them contribute. And so that's where we're looking at the social enterprise and the conventional enterprise, and it's wrapped around something we call humane entrepreneurship. What is humane entrepreneurship? Well, we're looking at the human cycle, and we're looking at the enterprise cycle. We're saying that when you create a company, when you create a business, that it's not just it's for profits. Profits is one thing, but also what does it mean for society? What does it mean for the human? What does it mean for the workplace? And so the hypothesis by Dr. Keyshawn Kim and Dr. Ayman El-Tarabishi and many leaders in this who are in this space contend that there's not a trade-off between a growing company and a company that's good for people. They're not mutually exclusive, that you can actually have both. And so that's the whole concept behind humane entrepreneurship. And it's something that we really must address, because with automation, we can't just have a few jobs, jobs for few, and then have the rest who are unemployed or underemployed. And so there are 10 tenets behind this whole concept of humane entrepreneurship. As I outlined, there's the human cycle. And so the human cycle deals with empowerment, it deals with ethics, it deals with equality in the workplace, it deals with engagement, and it deals with how to build an ecosystem. That's the human cycle, and it's for human, right? When you think of the enterprise, and this is for enterprise, this is for profit, this is for business, what makes good business sense, we look at envisioning, what is the enthusiasm, and enlightenment, experimentation, and excellence. These are the 10 ideas, or these are the 10 principles that we bring together: the dreaming, the excitement, the envisioning. This will make up the human enterprise. And so in Korea right now, there are a number of businesses who have been given awards because they've been able to accomplish both, be a sustainable growing business, while at the same time be a place where you're good for your employees, you're taking care of those in the workforce, you're empowering people, you're giving time off. And so that's where, and so just to wrap it up, in terms of, we started out with MSMEs and SDGs, how that they're vital to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. But then we're wrapping things up here in this presentation in terms of what is the next step as we address the 4th Industrial Revolution. We believe at ICSB is that the human enterprise will be the forum in terms of how we make sure that those who start businesses are empowered that they're good for the society, they're good for the economy, and they're good for the entrepreneur. I just want to thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Sargeant. And can you hear me, Dr. Sargeant?
Yes, yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for this enlightening webinar series about the impact of policy on micro and small businesses worldwide. And I want to introduce myself to all the attendees on this session and those that will be recording. My name is Ayman El-Tarabishi, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Council for Small Business. I have some follow-up questions, Dr. Sargeant, that I want to ask, and then we'll open up to the audience to take any more questions here. The first question I want to ask here is, what is the impact of policy on micro and small businesses? Based on your experience and your role at the SBA advocacy, and also, starting your own business and now engaged with ICSB, how do you see the impact of policy on small businesses and micro businesses worldwide?
Well, that is a very good question. Well, the impact of policy is huge, right? talked to many throughout the world where they recognize that we have to have the right policy, that the policy creates the right environment. I liken policy to a game of soccer, that if the rules are clear and it makes sense, then the game of soccer or football is poetic, it flows. But if the rules are not good, then there's stoppage, there's fouls, there's no one knows what's out of bounds, and it takes a long time for the game to take place, and it's no fun to watch. Likewise, with policy, there are a number of countries who have outlined. I just spoke with the Argentine minister. He is the secretary for entrepreneurship and SMEs, and he outlined that they have gone from a year and a half to start a business to now it's significantly less. I spoke to Prince Constantine of the Netherlands, and he said that there's no other time in the Netherlands where it's such an easy time to start a business. Many countries still, it takes too long to start a business because of the red tape. And so that's where policy matters, that if it takes a long time to start a business, what you find is that more businesses or more companies will be in the informal sector where they're not registered, where they're not really paying taxes, and they really won't scale. And so that's why policy matters, and it must be right.
Great, thank you. The second question is, I know you attended on behalf of ICSB meetings at the OECD, and also you were one of the main organizers of the ICSB MSME Summit at the United Nations. What do you believe is the role of organizations like OECD, United Nations, the World Bank, and so on, in moving forward the agenda for small and micro businesses worldwide? What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think that with these institutions that are highly respected, that receive significant amount of funding, I think that it's important that whether it's the World Bank, whether it's OECD, whether it's the IMF, whether it's United Nations, they have a mandate to really serve a world that's looking for answers. And so I believe that by working with an organization like ICSB, the International Council of Small Business, where our sole focus is since 1955, is to highlight what can be done in support of small businesses. I think that by working with an organization like ICSB, we can provide them with policy answers. With those who are on the ground, we can make that connection, because these are organizations, as outlined, they have funding, they receive funding, and in many cases, they spend a tremendous amount of resources every year. And we have to look to see whether or not that's well spent. And so I know with ICSB, it's in 85 countries. It's a convener. That's the beauty. It's a respected partner. It's in terms of its outreach. And so by working with ICSB, I think these organizations can benefit from the network we have from the grassroots to really be much more effective as they try to accomplish, say, some of the SDG goals that are outlined.
And last question, and we'll open up here. And you mentioned a lot of different points, including humane entrepreneurship and also different challenges there. Dr. Sargeant, what gets you excited about the future? When you see what's all happening in the world and all the challenges that are happening, and what makes you stop as you're walking or whatever you're doing and makes you smile and say, this is exciting. This is something that this is going to make a big difference. Can you share some of those things that get you excited about the impact or the role of SMEs and micro businesses?
What gets me excited is that we're starting to bring ideas, and we're tapping into talents that we have never been able to tap in before. That nowadays, as we move into, as I outlined, the fourth industrial revolution, now we're finally getting to a point where we're moving down a point where those who have been left out for so long, for a generation, who've never been part of the equation, part of the solution, via technology, via access to the tools, now they can have a voice. And there are huge challenges that have to be solved. And so when you think of an entrepreneur is always forward-looking. And so I am expecting great things, great solutions to be had. The beauty about the day that we just witnessed, May the 11th at the United Nations, and that MSME Day, which is on June 27th, we talk about the fact that June 26th, 1945, was the founding of the United Nations. That was a coming together. The League of Nations failed, so now the United Nations came together to say, hey, we need to create a foundation for peace going forward. This is during it that's going to create a day for peace worldwide. Well, June 27th is now MSME Day. That's the day after. So after you have forged peace, a construct for peace, how do you build? And so what excites me is that MSMEs worldwide are in the building. They're the builders. They're the ones that are going to make peace sustainable and make productivity sustainable. And so that makes me excited that the future is going to be bright, because we're going to empower MSMEs, and they're going to have their rightful place in solving many of the problems that we have currently.
Great. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is open it up for all the audience attending. If they have any questions, there's a section in the webinar series itself. You can just type in a question or comment, and we can answer it right away. So let's just give it a minute. Just to add to this, Dr. Sargeant here, right? We know that SMEs are going to play a critical role moving forward in terms of innovation. And can you talk a little bit about the area of innovation that you see that's more pressing now for the world to move forward on?
Yeah. When you think of innovation, I'm very excited. For the last, say, there's talk about Web 2.0. Web 2.0 was where we built out the internet. Web 3.0 is where Web 2.0 was where we built out the internet. So basically, the internet was like you read it. It was like a newspaper. Web 3.0 is more, everyone wants to be engaged. So it's the social. So it's not that you just want to read. Now you want to be part of the discussion. Web 4.0, I believe, is that now we're looking at data, but not just that. It's not only focused on technology. It's how do you apply all these tools in your everyday life. So for the farmer or the fisherman or the person who works in the village, he or she will now be able to use technology, like, for example, with solar power. Now we're using the resources to so you don't have to build systems to bring power to villages. Now you can put up a solar panel and create the power that you need. And now you can tap into the internet. Now you can tap in worldwide. And so when I look at the innovations that are taking place, I see the innovations taking place by those who are in communities who may not have been tied in previously. Now they're solving many issues around water, around electricity, around food, around transportation. Those are some of the things that really excite me.
Great. We have one question here, and the question comes is how do you see or you perceive the importance of the different stakeholders that includes the youth, women, and also the kind of the ones that do not have the resources available? Let's call them the third tier of sorts.
Well, I think they're very, very important. As I mentioned, when you think of knowledge or when you think of expertise, that knowledge is not localized to any group or any gender or any age, right? So for us to be effective, for us to be efficient, we have to involve the youth, right? When you think of the youth, because they're not burdened by history, they come with a new perspective. They come with with a new outlook, and they're looking to solve problems. And they also recognize that this world will become theirs at some point. And so we have to really engage the youth. When you think of women, which make up girls, and women, which make up half the population, women are the first caregivers. When you think of a child, especially a mother, the first teacher for us all is a woman. And so we need to empower women, because they're the first teachers. That if we don't empower the teachers, then the student's not empowered. But also in terms of solving problems around society and the family, that's very, very important. And so we need to engage the youth, women, and those who are, as I said, those who have been left out. Just because you don't have a lot of money doesn't mean that you don't have a lot of ideas, that you're not smart. And so with technology, we need to bring them into the fold, because by them being able to take their rightful place, then we benefit as a society, as a world. And so that's very important.
Great. And we have one last comment that's coming here. It's saying, at the United Nations, I think somebody was attending the United Nations event, there was an announcement made that the ICSB and Facebook are global partners. Can you elaborate a little bit more about this partnership and what's going to happen?
Yes, we were pleased to announce that ICSB and Facebook are global partners going forward. And so when you think of the Facebook brand, as was pointed out, as Dr. El Tarabishi and I read the announcement, that in particular in Argentina, 83% of SMEs use Facebook in Argentina, right? And so when you think of the Facebook brand, when you think of the reach that Facebook has, whether it's WhatsApp or Instagram or Facebook itself, it has a huge platform. Well, we hope to work with Facebook to engage that platform, to reach out to MSMEs, to put forth an agenda in terms of recognizing why MSMEs are important in each country, help them across the board, whether it's our understanding, being an advocate for policy, as outlined, that we need to have someone or have organizations in each country being empowered with Facebook brand, since it cuts across so many different continents. Now, as for the global marketplace for trade, now you're an MSMEs. Now you can tap into customers and partners worldwide. You can share best practices, and I think from Facebook's point of view, they understand that the value that ICSB, like I said, going back to 1955, our deep bench, we can bring a lot to the table. And so those are some of the things we hope to benefit from the Facebook relationship. June 27th will be key, because it's the first MSME day, and so we hope that Facebook will light up on that day to highlight why it's so important to support MSME worldwide. And that's part of what we do with Facebook.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And at this point, we're almost done with this webinar here. I would like to announce our next webinar, which will be held in Argentina. And our next webinar, our fourth webinar here, will be led by the president of ICSB, Dr. Luca Iandoli, and in which he will be, as part of the conference, we're going to switch the times a little bit here, as part of our World Conference in Argentina, we'll do a webinar talking about the state of the art of what ICSB has done under his leadership for the last year. He'll make also some major announcements at the event, and also thank the board, the existing board here, and also introduce the new board. So he will be making some announcements, talk about the state of the art of what ICSB did in the last year under his leadership, and kind of talk a little bit about the future moving forward. And Dr. Sargeant, I want to thank you for your time and effort with ICSB for this exceptional presentation. And we will be posting this online with the slides as well, and we'll move from there. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Dr. El Tarabishi. There were 3 questions that were asked. I didn't get to them, but I hope to follow up offline to answer your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.